Again, good afternoon and welcome to our Healing the Traumatized Brain. I want to welcome everyone who is joining us online and those who are joining us here in person. We want to thank you very much. Whether you're working on your own mental health or you're wanting to understand others, this is the place to learn about the traumatized brain. Just a few housekeeping comments before we begin. Really important, on the back table, we have handouts that will help as you're going through the lecture series. And also, there is a calendar of upcoming events. And if you grab one of those, I have to put a plug in for this, David, but I'm doing a hydrotherapy class here June 28th. Yeah. So if you want to know about hydrotherapy, and then hopefully in the year to come, we're going to do medicinal herbs. Mm-hmm. So, but also we have question and answer cards. I know that questions flood your mind when David is talking. So if you have a question, grab one of those cards, write it down, and at the end of each session, there'll be a 15-minute question and answer. We also, if you need Spanish translation, we have little transmitters, and Dr. Arvizu will be translating for us, so I'm sure it's going to be an excellent translation. We also are having another meeting after this, immediately or 5 to 10 minutes after. We'll have a second, and it will be recognizing warning signs in children. And then tomorrow at 2 o'clock and 3:30, we have generational trauma and healing the traumatized brain. So you're in store for a lot this weekend. But before we go any further, I'd like to introduce David Jones, and you can see that he is a licensed marriage and therapist counselor and specializing in traumatized brain. He's been in the field for nearly 20 years working with at-risk youth and also helping veterans with PTSD. He also is currently sitting as the chair for the psychology department at Weimar University and runs a private practice in Washington. His passion is helping people move past their past so they can finally enjoy the present. So join with me in welcoming David. I keep wanting to call you doctor.
Not there yet.
But well, let's welcome David Jones. Thank you.
All right. Make sure I'm up here. All right. Welcome everyone this afternoon. Apologies, I just have to make sure that we have everything going. Can you all hear me on the microphone right now?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Almost there. Okay. All right. Is that better?
Yep.
All right. Excellent. Okay. So today we are going to be looking at domestic violence and how we begin to heal the brain within the context of intimate relationships. So I always try to let people know that whenever we cover topics like this, I always try to give a little bit of a trigger warning because some of the things we talk about can be difficult to hear. I try to measure those details without being so censored that no one actually knows what I'm talking about. So we will be talking about domestic violence and how this occurs. Now, I'll be going through some of the statistics today on how often this actually occurs, because one of the things that oftentimes it's overlooked is how frequent domestic violence actually occurs. And so we'll be going over some of those statistics. We will also look at what are some of the things that cause us to be vulnerable and put us in a place where we are likely to actually experience domestic violence, or what puts somebody at risk for domestic violence. Then we're going to look at some of the ways to help people escape from these kinds of situations. And so that's a lot of agenda items, and I want to try to be mindful of the time. So I want to leave time for questions. So if you have questions along the way, as Pastor Bilby pointed out already, just make sure to ask those questions and write those down on the card so that I can come back to them afterwards. All right. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into today's presentation. All right, so you may not know about this, but does anybody know what the longest running scientific psychological study is? It was actually done by a specific university, but it's been running for a long time. Now, some longitudinal studies can go on for like 15 years. I remember when that one happened, they were looking at the effects of smoking marijuana. And lo and behold, it turns out that there is no safe quantities of smoking marijuana because it actually drops IQ points by an entire standard deviation. That's 15 points. So there is no safe amount of marijuana use. Any kind of sustained use actually does affect IQ. But 15 years sounds like a pretty long study. I mean, like, anybody remember what you were doing 15 years ago and you feel the effects of 15 years later? But this study, surprisingly, has been going on for much longer than that. And in this particular study, they were asking the question of what is it that's most important to you and what seems to be the most important determining factor for longevity. Okay. Now, does anybody want to take a guess at what the most important factor is for longevity? Of all the things you can do to increase your lifespan, does anybody know what the single most important factor is?
Positive.
Positivity, happiness, contentment,
Peace of mind.
peace of mind. I like peace of mind, and you said
Sleeping.
sleeping. Yeah, no, sleeping is actually extremely important. I mean, if you go long enough, it actually will cause problems. So let me jump back over to this one. So the strongest the health and well-being were the two things that they talked about as being strongly associated with longevity. But the strongest factor of all of them was happiness in relationships. When they did this study has been going on for 89 years. It's incredible. Actually, the oldest participants, I believe, are 89 years old. And this study started so long ago that actually there's a former U.S. president that was actually a part of this study that Harvard put out there. And that's actually John F. Kennedy. He was actually a part of this study for this longitudinal study that's been going on. They studied these men, their spouses, their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren. They've studied this all the way across the lifespan. They call these people every single year and ask them this whole battery of questions, and they've moved on to their kids. There's been at least 4 researchers that have been on this particular project, and the reason there's been 4 of them is because they died, because like the study is so long that people actually have to keep passing the baton to track what is going on. But the single most important factor was having healthy relationships. That is how critical it is to survival to have healthy relationships. In fact, there's a text that I'm familiar with, and for myself, I come from a Christian tradition. So in Genesis, there is a statement that's made before there was like any sin or problems in the world, there was one thing that was said to not be good even before there was sin. Does anybody happen to know what that is? It is not good for man to be alone. That's wild. And so this is built so deeply into the human psyche, so deeply into the human system, that even if you lived in a perfect world, being alone would still be a problem. And so this is why, and the reason I'm bringing all this up is because this is one of the reasons why people can be so vulnerable to entering into bad relationships. Because people would rather be in a bad relationship than be alone. And that's not people being crazy. It's because the need is so deep and profound that people would rather be in a situation that feels abusive or be there for the kids than to actually be alone. And this is exploited. So yes, the study is almost 80 years old and has proven that embracing community helps us to live longer. There's a quote here and it says, "Loneliness kills. It's as powerful as smoking or alcoholism." And during the pandemic, they actually did studies on this too. They found that loneliness contributed to almost every single health measure that you can imagine. This includes blood pressure, this includes weight gain, this includes heart conditions. So this is not just affecting people psychologically, it physiologically wears you down to be lonely. But the opposite is also true, that it actually has a healing effect when you have closeness and companionship. Even when I've had very difficult conversations with people where the entire session is spent with a person feeling really dysregulated and sad and upset, even in those kind of situations, just knowing somebody listen to them makes a difference. They actually just start to improve just from talking to somebody. Now, of course, I want to be able to do more than just talk to people, but this is a really potent healer of the nerves to be able to connect with someone. All right, so let's start with first defining a little bit about domestic violence. So a concept I want to introduce you to, and I apologize, this one didn't make it on the slides for Spanish, but I'll explain this. It's a 3-part system, and it's what's called the drama triangle. All right, so the drama triangle. Now, you may want to just write this out for your own purposes here, but the drama triangle has 3 different roles in it. Sorry, the text is a little bit small, but I'll explain what they are. And the 3 different roles are the rescuer, the persecutor, and the victim, right? The persecutor, the rescuer, and the victim. These are the 3 roles that people cycle through when relationship patterns become really unhealthy. It's persecutor, rescuer, and victim. Now, just to give you a little sense of how this works, and I'll just kind of lay out what this looks like in a relationship where somebody is being manipulative. So let's say I come home and, I'll choose somebody else other than myself. So let's say that Jan comes home and she's a little bit late from work. And when she comes in, she's like, oh, look, I'm sorry, I'm late. And then the guy says, well, you're always late. I guess I'm always going to have to spend the rest of my life waiting on you. Now, that kind of statement right there is designed to pull somebody in. But there's a role that they're putting themselves in. Now, between persecutor, rescuer, and victim, which role is that person putting themselves in with that statement? Well, it's actually victim, right? They're putting themselves in the victim role. Yes, and which puts you, who came home late, innocently, into the persecutor role, right? And this is how this dance works. Because you don't want to be the persecutor because that makes you the bad guy. And if you are the persecutor, you only want to do this temporarily. And so so we'll go through this dialogue. So first she says, I'm sorry I'm late. He says, well, I guess I'm just gonna have to spend the rest of my life waiting on you. You don't really care about how I feel. Now he's the victim. Now he wants her to go somewhere because he doesn't want her to stay in the persecutor role. And most normal human beings don't want to be a persecutor. So guess which role she jumps into? Between persecutor, rescuer, and victim, which one do you think she's gonna try to jump to? Rescuer, that's right. So it's like, oh, I'm so sorry. Look, I really do care about you. I don't want you waiting on me all the time. And so now she's trying to rescue him. And he's like, you know what? All you care about is yourself. I don't want to hear it. Now, what role has he jumped into? He's the persecutor, which makes her the victim. Now, she doesn't want to be in that particular victim role, and he doesn't want her there either. So now what he does is like, you know what? I understand. I know you just forget things. You just don't care. And it's my job to kind of carry that burden. So, we'll just figure it out. I'll just take the hit and everything will be fine. Now, who has he just made himself into? The rescuer. He's just made himself the rescuer. So I'm going to take the burden, but I'm going to try to save you from this. Don't worry, I'll take the heat. Now, all of these roles are designed to avoid responsibility because all of this stuff started with her just like, she was just like, she already took responsibility for it, but now she feels like she's just done something to damage him. And this is how this dance goes constantly. People are constantly trying to put you into these triangles when you're in a manipulative relationship. You can watch this dance throughout. So I want you to keep these 3 roles in mind because as we go through today's presentation, I want to see if you can catch if the dance is happening. Now, of course, the proper way to deal with this is to stay in the adult role. Now, let's just say I was, my illustration, if I'm Jan and I'm coming home and I say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm late. He's like, well, I guess I have to spend the rest of my life waiting. Now, I can engage with that and jump into like a victim role or rescue role. But instead, I would like to stay in what I call the adult role. So what I'm going to say is, what do you mean by that? Now notice, I'm not taking responsibility for their feelings. I'm actually letting them take the responsibility for their own feelings. It's like, well, you just obviously don't care about my feelings. Is that what I said? No, but I can just tell that's how you are. So that's what you want to believe. Now notice, where am I putting all my attention right now? Yeah, I'm not defending myself because this ain't about me. I've already owned myself. I'm not owning yours. And so I'm going to make sure that you keep holding that bag. And if you want to sit there and believe that I don't care about you and all that stuff, you can believe that if you want to. It's a lot more empowering, isn't it? Jan has some skills. So anyway, these are the things that we want to be able to learn how to do. So this is one of the first identifying markers is if your communication is getting into a drama triangle rather than an actual one-to-one communication with somebody, this starts to move in that direction. Now, side note, you may find that your average relationship sometimes slips into this because you all have probably done something like this before where you kind of got into the victim role or got into the rescue role. This does not mean that you're in a domestic violence relationship, but this is something to be mindful of. Because in domestic violence relationships, almost all conversations sound like this. It is a constant drama cycle. Almost nothing ever gets resolved because we're constantly trying to figure out who the bad guy is. And that's the name of the game. Okay. So defining domestic violence and intimate partner violence. Okay, so what is it? So domestic violence is a pattern of behavior aimed at gaining power and control over a partner in an intimate relationship. Power is the name of the game. The reason for the drama triangle is because it's an effort to keep power in the relationship. I need to make sure that you are subject to me. It is a constant power dynamic. Second piece here is that there are different forms of abuse. Abuse can be emotional, and sometimes women, and I'm saying women because like something like 90% plus domestic violence situation are men perpetrating on women. So this is not me being sexist, just more often than not how this plays out. I have worked with men who've been in domestic violence situations, and it does happen to men too. And I'll get into that a little bit later. But the forms of abuse can be emotional, can be verbal, can be physical, and it can be even just things that are like coercive. Like, if you don't do this, then I'm gonna take the kids away. We're gonna look at actually the wheel of domestic violence. It actually tells you all the different ways in which people can engage in this behavior. And the impact on the victims, and this is part of the reason why I bring it here, is it can be very traumatizing. Women who've gotten out of these relationships, sometimes they'll say it took me almost a year to get to the place where I actually started thinking for myself again, because it's so deeply impactful. All right, so the statistics, on average, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner. This equates to more than 10 million men and women annually. The number of deaths that come from domestic violence is actually relatively high as well. There are more people who will die from domestic violence this year than people who died in the 9/11 attacks. That is the reality. When you hear about mass murders that happen, mass murders considered 3 or more people that die in a given situation. Like over 75% of mass murders are domestic violence situations, because these men oftentimes will not only take the life of their partner, but they'll also take the child's life and then their own. And so this is why you end up with these situations. Domestic violence is not a joke. If you hear somebody who is telling these things to you, you must take this very seriously, because it can be lethal. All right. So the statistics again for women are 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men. If you just do the math inside of this room right now, that means that there are at least 8 or 9 people who probably experienced this before, just based on numbers alone, or at least have witnessed or been involved with this. Because domestic violence isn't just about just a man and a woman together or 2 partners together, but it's also about children, because children are also the victims of these kinds of crimes. So some of the signs are, if you're in a relationship like this, some of the signs are being insulted or demeaning, acting in ways that are scary or threatening. Sometimes there'll be, I remember somebody that I know and I'm really close to, they were talking about how they were kind of talking to somebody, and whenever they would say something they didn't like, they wouldn't do anything, they just kind of look at them and just kind of glare and hold the glare for an extra 5 or 6 seconds. And what that does is it sends a signal, but it's hard to report that. Like, how do you go to explain that to somebody? So now you have to put up with this little measuring device that was brought in here, this little power play, but these are one of the signals. In almost every case that I know of, I've never talked to anyone who's been in a domestic violence situation that did not see early signs that this was coming. But what happens is we learn to stop listening to our intuitions. So just real quick, just so I have an illustration that I can give you about intuitions. There was a woman who was driving home from work one day, and when she was driving home, she just noticed that it seemed like somebody was following. She couldn't prove it, but she just kind of felt like something was there. And then when she got out of her car, she could just feel like somebody was behind her and it was way too close. She did not waste her time looking behind her. She did not care if anybody thought she looked silly. She just took off in a dead sprint, went into her apartment, went into her room, went into her apartment, and did not, please don't miss this, did not turn on her lights. Now, do you know why she didn't turn on her lights? Exactly, because then he'll know where she lives. And so she just sat there for like 30 minutes. She watched outside the window and she saw this guy walking around and driving around patrolling, because he was actually stopping. Now, her instincts told her long before she could come up with any kind of logical reason for why she felt afraid. And one of the things that keep people from escaping from domestic violence situations, even early on, is because they don't listen to their intuitions. They don't want to seem impolite. Like for me, when I get on the elevator, I'm very conscious of the fact that as a man, I'm getting on the elevator with, if I'm there with a female, sometimes I'll try to just double check to see if it's even okay for me to come on there, because I'd rather her feel comfortable than to feel worried. And so sometimes people may not be like, well, I don't want to not get on the elevator because, you know, David's a black man. I don't want to seem like I'm being racist. It's like, listen, when you were talking about your safety, who cares? Who cares? Right? Now, this is not an endorsement of going around being racist, but what it is an endorsement of is listening to your intuitions. Your intuitions are actually something that I believe are very God-given gifts. And when you don't listen to them, oftentimes something bad happens. I cannot iterate this enough. In every situation that I've ever talked to someone where something happened, like whether it's domestic violence or being attacked, every single person, if you ask them and wait long enough, they will tell you they felt like something was wrong with what happened. If you think about if you've ever been to any kind of situations like this, you can feel when something just kind of turns. It's just a little bit off. And it's particularly hard sometimes to listen to that instinct if it's somebody that you know and trust. But I've had people even say this about their own kids. They're just like, I was talking to my son one day, and then just something kind of switched inside of him. I knew something was wrong. Listen to your instincts. Listen to your instincts. You don't owe it to somebody else to give into those things. Now, what I want to iterate with this part, because oftentimes questions come up with how do you tell the difference between an instinct and an anxiety? Instincts are looking at fears of what is happening. Anxieties are fears about what could happen, right? So when you have anxiety, whatever you're anxious about isn't actually happening. Like you're afraid the plane is going to crash when you get on board. Like there's no indication that that's actually happening. But to quote Gavin Becker, use an example, it's like, but if you're in the airport and you see the pilot stumbling out of the cockpit and he's drunk, it's like, okay, yeah, your probably instincts can tell you to not board that plane because you have evidence in front of you that that's really what's happening. All right, so does that kind of make sense to everyone?
Yes.
Intuition is super important. Okay. So what we're going to do is I have a few other slides, and I wanted to be able to share with you just a couple of quick stories on just how some of these stories have played out in people's real lives. So in that first picture there, we have Rachel. She was actually with her husband for 18 years. The man that she was with was 6'7", almost 300 pounds. That kind of stuff makes a difference, by the way. I remember when I was in high school, I was never like really large, but I was like in really good shape. I could lift a lot of weight, but I had a cousin who probably wasn't like that much stronger than me in terms of like how much we can lift, but his size was definitely more than mine. He weighed almost 100 pounds more than I did. And I remember he was just letting me know, he's like, hey, David, look at you, trying to be all tough. And like, he kind of just like grabbed my hand and like, he pulled me in, and it was just like, whoop. It's just like, I couldn't keep my feet planted on the ground because his size is a definite advantage. And so when you're talking about somebody 6'7", 300 pounds, even though this gal was a really tough woman, there was not a real contention in terms of the fight. But she talked about how things started out. He was extremely charming, very popular in the community. Everybody loved him. And this is not uncommon for men who do things like this to have that kind of reputation. They are very, very, very mindful of their reputations, and they guard it very, very carefully. And so dates began. He was kind of working, but he was kind of in between jobs, red flag, but had all this potential. And she was like, oh, I think this guy's really great. And the relationship moved really, really fast. It's like we've only been together a couple months and he wanted to get married already. This is another red flag. Now, red flags don't mean that it's definitely a problem, but it does mean you should have your eyes open. And part of the reason why he wanted to do that is because in a domestic violence situation, the grooming starts early, and the sooner I can marry you, the more power I have over you. Then after they got married, he immediately wanted to go move somewhere else, far away from your friends and family. It's not accidents. And little signals started to show up early. Like she cooked something and it didn't taste that great. He's like, oh, this is kind of lousy, which was just a really mean comment. And then when she was bothered by it, he's like, what? You got your feelings hurt about this? What's wrong? So if you think about that triangle, something is happening here. Because if she says something's wrong, guess what role he gets to be in now? He's the victim. Oh, I can't speak my mind. I can't let you know when something doesn't taste good. I guess I have to just keep my feelings to myself. Warning signs. So fast forward a little bit. She has the first episode of violence. He actually attempted to strangle her. By the way, if choking ever happens in a relationship, that really, any time you have violence in a relationship, that should be a big red flag. But strangling in particular is extremely dangerous. Somebody can die almost 2 to 3 hours or even 24 hours after being strangled because there are little bones inside of your throat that can get dislodged, and they can actually block the airway and the person can no longer breathe. It is not safe. Something like that happens. Strangulation is probably one of the most escalated forms of violence. Once that happens, you are dealing with somebody that is not in control of themselves and not safe to be around. But she stayed. They had some kids. She had 2 boys with him. Life went through this constant up and down of violence. And what finally caused her to leave is that she finally saw that he might be a threat to her kids. And this is oftentimes what happens for women in these relationships, is it's not important enough to protect myself, but I don't want my kids to go through this. Bookmark. Stop and ask yourself a question. If you are experiencing this, or anybody online that's watching, stop and ask yourself a question. The relationship that you're in, would you recommend that relationship to your son or to your daughter? Would you recommend that they be in a relationship like that? And if the answer is no, then your answer should be the same. Oftentimes what happens is we tend to care more about others that are closer to us than we do about ourselves. And there's nothing wrong with caring a lot about people, but you want to set the same standards, because if you ask that same person, well, why wouldn't you want your daughter to be in a relationship like that? It's like, well, if anybody did something like that to my daughter, I'd probably kill him. It's like, I'm not advocating murder. But I'm saying, like, yeah, that probably means you should leave. It's probably time to go. So anyway, he became really violent and had made some threats in front of the kids. I won't repeat all those. And she finally had enough and left. Now, when she left, she went and got a protective order against him, which a lot of people believe that protective orders are helpful, and they can be. But the problem with the protective order is you can't act on it until someone violates it. Right. So it's like this thing will become active retroactively. So, and you have to imagine that you have to hope that the person actually cares about consequences to themselves. And unfortunately, people who are violent this way actually don't care about the personal consequences to themselves, because they will guard their reputation at all costs. Now, for those of you who maybe read through scripture a lot, you will find a character in the Bible that does every single one of these things that I'm going to be talking to you about, and the character is Saul. At every step of the way, he is willing to kill anyone to keep his reputation solid. He gaslights people, he manipulates people. He says, who else is going to treat you this way? You're not going to have it as good if this other guy comes in. Like, everything he says follows the domestic violence dialogue to a T. It's incredible, which is one of these little soft evidences that perhaps the things that are written in there are not the stories. So fast forwarding a little bit, this man continued to make these threats. The cops weren't really doing anything. She called the cops and like, well, I guess, he's sitting out in front of there. I guess we can't really do anything. I mean, I wish I could say that's uncommon, but it's not, because the police a lot of times don't want to be bothered with something until there's like a real crime being committed. And unfortunately, one day he came in, he kind of went through the doors, and they were in a salon where she worked, and he pulled out a sawed-off shotgun and fired in her direction. And she said that she remembered that as soon as he came in, everything in her instinct said, run, duck behind the desk, pull that thing over you. He still came over there, and he took the first shot. Now, because she kind of curled herself up a little bit, that shot blasted her in the leg. And after that, took another shot that just went right past her head, but did not hit her head. That's why you can see her picture, because she told her story. And afterwards, the gun seemed to have jammed. He seemed to have dropped it. And I quote, she said she grabbed the gun, and she says she could not understand how she did this, but she managed to squeeze the gun so tightly that he could not get it out of her hands. And this guy, 6'7", 300 pounds, and could not get this out of her hands. Her grip was so tight that she actually broke some of her fingers because she was holding on to the gun so tight. She eventually had to give up. Now, I want to tell you right now that I don't just believe, she actually said the words, I had supernatural strength. Now, some people think that because we experience traumas, that sometimes it makes people question whether or not God exists. But I'll tell you right now, that was impossible. That was completely impossible. And yet, something happened. And so anyway, that gentleman did the same thing that all the other guys do. And they took a route and ended their own lives, and it just ended in all this destruction. But she was able to escape from that place. But these things are very serious, and they happen. And her story is simply just not uncommon. All right. So next year, we want to look at causes and risk factors. What is it that puts us at risk for domestic violence? So the reason I started with that first factor around what the most important things are in our life is that to some degree, all of us can have a vulnerability to being in a relationship that's not healthy because we're naturally social. Now, I don't believe we want to turn off our social button. So the other things we want to look at is like, what are some additional risk factors that can make us even more vulnerable to domestic violence? So one of them is low self-esteem. If somebody believes that they're inadequate, not worth very much, they kind of hate themselves, these folks tend to be very, very high at risk for domestic violence. Because that guy will come along and shower her with compliments. This is something that's called love bombing. It's like, oh, you're the greatest person ever, and just nonstop flattery, send flowers to you, and all these things just to try to build up that self-esteem. But once it's there, once it's kind of like got you, then all the insults start rolling in. And because this person has lower self-esteem, they actually assume these things must be true. Maybe I'm not that good of a cook. Maybe I'm not really worthy. Maybe I shouldn't be late all the time. And so these things are one of the risk factors. The other one is previous history of being exposed to violence. I've worked with kids and with adults who, because of how they've experienced things, when they hear violence going on in the background, they're just like, okay. So they've just learned to habituate it. It's like, yeah, that's what people do. People just yell and people scream, and sometimes people get a little bit threatening. It just doesn't really register. Now, it's not that they're okay with it. It doesn't feel good for them, but they're so used to hearing it that it just seems like this is part of how things are supposed to be. So actually, exposure to violence can put you at higher risk for getting back into it again because it feels normal. I've also seen that, when I've worked with veterans, sometimes, what kind of jobs veterans will often take once they get out of the military?
Security.
That would be nice. Yeah, security, firefighting, police department, and it's because their nervous system is wired for that. That world makes sense. Now, it's not because it's fun, but it makes sense. I know how to duck dodge, and I know how to spot when something is about to go down, and it makes sense because it's an adaptive way to try to deal with all that energy. And so these are some of the things. Again, if we've been around violence, then we become adapted to it. The other part is just like mental health factors. If somebody is depressed or anxious or dealing with any mental health factors, they tend to be more vulnerable. It's actually quite easy to manipulate somebody who has serious mental illness going on. I used to work with people who have psychosis, and you see people who are walking around talking to themselves, and a lot of times people get freaked out by seeing that. And understandably, because some people really do have some behaviors that are hard to understand. But it wasn't until I actually worked with them that I realized that they are also highly likely to be victimized. And part of the reason for that is a lot of them will get Social Security disability, and because they think that their dad is actually from Mars and that they have these special powers where they can talk to people through light sockets, it's very easy to come along and then just play into their narrative and say, hey man, I just heard from your Martian dad that you should probably give me your money. And they'll totally give into it because they're living in a totally different world with a totally different currency. And so mental illness actually is a vulnerability to abuse. And it does happen. I've worked with people who are psychotic that get financially exploited often. Okay, so economic stresses are another one. Education is another factor. Social isolation, and a lack of awareness of social norms. Because if my behavior is not very normal and people think I'm awkward, then I automatically don't have as many friends. But for somebody who's trying to prey on me, that makes me a perfect target because this is the one person who gets me. It's the one person who accepts me. And so these are all things that make people vulnerable to domestic violence. Okay. There's also things like cultural norms and influences, like gender roles. This has been exploited, and I've seen this in the church context as well, that people talk about man as the head of the household, and therefore you have to do what I say. That's not what the Bible actually says, but it's something that is often used. Or you have cultures where the man is supposed to be the dominant person in the home, and this is oftentimes used as a way to demand power over your spouse. But I just want to let you know that is just absolutely unnecessary, and that is not what's taught. In fact, from a Christian perspective, show me one time in the Bible where Jesus ever demanded any of his disciples do anything on pains of consequences in the moment. Isn't that weird? You can't find a single example. You can find a lot of examples where the way that he led was through service. Free information. All right. So for this one, this will be one of our last slides, not on understanding domestic violence. I'm just going to walk you through some of these more specific risk factors, and I'll share with you illustrations for how this thing actually does tend to play out. So I know you can't read all of those, so I'll be letting you know what they say. So on that wheel of violence that's talked about, a wheel of power and control, you have physical violence, and you have violence that can be sexual, emotional, and even financial. These are all different ways that people can find themselves being exploited. For those of you who maybe are not in these kind of relationships, I still want you to take note because I can almost guarantee you if the statistics are 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men, you probably know somebody who's experiencing this. So it's very, very important that you be able to spot these signs if they're occurring. So one of them is using coercion or threats. This is kind of like somebody making or carrying out threats. It's like, well, if you leave, then I'm going to do something to the dog. And I wish I could say I'm making these things up, but this happens. And there's follow through, unfortunately, with a lot of these things. Well, if you try to call the police, then I'm leaving you and I'm never coming back. Now, you would think that that would not be a threat, but it is because the person is really stuck in the zone where they think they can rescue this person. And now, if I don't rescue you, then this is a failure on my part. They can also coerce the person into dropping charges. Well, like, if you make these charges against me, I'm going to call CPS and I'm going to tell them that you've been hurting your kid. And what are you going to do about that? So these are all ways in which coercion is used, coercion and threats. The second one is the intimidation. So this is kind of like using, eye contact and body language. I'm talking to you, but I'm like standing right here. It's like, okay, is that really what you want to do right now? Now you can imagine how this feels. I would never do this to anybody, but like, you can imagine how this situation feels when somebody's this close to your face and talking to you this way. It starts messing with you emotionally. Now, just real quick, anybody here last night remember your hand all over the brain? The hand all over the brain? Okay, right. So you have this right here. So for those who aren't here, the palm of your hand down here is your brainstem. This is like your emotional limbic system that kind of folds over. This is actually how your brain organizes itself. And this is your prefrontal cortex, which wraps around the top of that emotional system. If I'm this close to your face, this part is going to flip up. And I want you to be thinking about this because I can control this part of you way easier than I can control this part of you. I need you to not be thinking. I just need you to be feeling and feeling afraid in particular. Because when I do this, you're very easy to control. Now, some of y'all think, oh, I'd never do that. How many people have watched any political ads and been a little bit persuaded that you shouldn't vote for the other guy? Do you know what they're appealing to? I'll tell you what it's not. It's not this part. If you vote for this person, they're going to kill babies and do all this other stuff. Now, they very well may do that, and you vote your conscience. But understand that the reason they're doing that is because it's way easier to control this than it is to control this. I don't want to talk to your thinking brain. I want to talk to your feeling brain because I can manipulate that. So using intimidation, I can get you afraid, but I can get you under control. Using the children. As I mentioned before, if you do something, then I'm going to take the kids away. What are they going to do? Oftentimes, there's also economic exploitation that goes on. Oftentimes, the men will often make sure that she doesn't work. Because as long as you're not working, if you try to leave, you're going to take care of yourself. So these are ways that this happens as well, the financial exploitation. Then the other one is the gaslighting one. This is probably one of the worst ones, even though it doesn't involve like any actual physical contact, is the denying and blaming. So I get mad, I get drunk, I push my wife. Next day she tries to talk to me, it's like, why did you push me last night? I said, I didn't push you. What are you talking about? It's like, yes, you did. We were standing right over there. It's like, show me. I don't see anything. There's no broken glass. You have any bruises on you? Like, what are you talking about? How do you even know that happened? Like, this is ridiculous. Well, do we really have to have this conversation? There we are. And that kind of stuff messes with people probably more than anything else, because once you start messing with people's minds this way, they stop trusting themselves. It makes it to where the only voice left in the relationship is mine. All right, does this make sense to everyone so far? I know it's a little bit heavy, but I really want people to understand how this thing works, especially when you're dealing with people who have like the more invisible forms of abuse that are going on. It's very hard to describe this to someone else, because guess what they'll do if you try to tell somebody else? Like, no, that's not what happened. And in fact, what these guys will often do is they'll start talking to their friends and saying, hey, I'm really worried about Diana. She just seems to sleep all the time. She comes up with all these wild stories. And I poison the well to make sure that if she ever talks to you, guess what you're going to think? That's just Diana. She's got problems. She doesn't know what's going on. She's sleep deprived. Something's going on in her head. It makes it to where she cannot be believed. All right. So then what do we do? I can send that power and control wheel to someone else, or to anybody else who would like to see it. And of course, we're recording our presentation, so you can look a little more into this. What do we do? Well, one of them is you want to recognize the cycle of violence. This is our second triangle that we're going to look at today, and it is the cycle of violence. So there are 3 phases to this. The first phase is the honeymoon phase. During this time, there's lots of apologies. Like, I'm sorry, I didn't really mean to do that. And then there's promises. I swear this will never happen again. There may even be tears and all kinds of stuff to just say, look, I've really changed. And if they're using the religious angle on there, it's like, look, I repented and God has forgiven me. Can you forgive me? Which, by the way, guess what they're using there in that triangle? Myself, me. You say no, now you're a person. Anyway, blaming, gifts, all these things happen in the honeymoon phase because now everything is sweet as pie. But after that happens, the next predictable phase is what's called the tension phase. I start to get a little more rude. I start to make little snide comments. You talk to me and I just cold shoulder you. One of the first things that will oftentimes happen in a relationship where power and control is being used is the person will do a silent treatment. They just won't talk to you for hours. That starts to mess with you. It's like, honey, what's wrong? Like I said, hi, how come you're not listening? Just cross my arm, run away, just walk around, pretend like you don't exist. Now I have you chasing me around, which is what I want. So that's the tension building phase. This is probably actually the hardest part of the relationship is the tension building phase. And oftentimes, you know what actually happens in these kind of situations is people will actually poke the bear. I've heard many women talk about this and men as well who have been on the receiving end of some of the violence, is they just try to like poke the person to just get it over with. They'll insult them. They'll say something mean to them just to get them to just blow up because they know after they blow up, guess what's coming next? Now it's honeymoon, apologies, gifts. So I have many other comments, but I know time is going to run away. But does this make sense to everybody? The cycle. This is the cycle. This actually happens in normal relationships too, but it's usually not like intensely violent. Like, you know, we'll have times where we're getting along, everything's sweet, we just went on vacation. Then we get back and you start noticing the dishes aren't put away, socks aren't folded, and you know, you actually didn't put on as much deodorant as you should have, whatever that is. Something happens where the tension starts to build again. Then we have an argument, then we apologize, and we get back into the dance. Now, there's a way to break this, but the way to break this is actually having more direct adult communication and not doing what it says in the center. I don't know if anybody can read that there, but at the center of this whole cycle of violence is denial. So what actually breaks this cycle of violence is the opposite of this. It's acceptance. I just own it's like, you know, I probably am just a little bit irritable today. I had a rough day at work, so I probably shouldn't be talking about that. That breaks that. So now we're not going through a cycle of violence. We're actually just having normal conversations. All right. So the effects on victims, like, so what effects does this leave on people? So one of the more obvious ones is injuries, physical injuries. I remember I talked with a woman whose entire lower jaw was completely reconstructed from the extent to which the violence actually occurred. The lady that I talked about before who was shot in the leg, I think she has a partial prosthetic on her leg. I mean, these things leave real scars. Probably the ones that are harder to track, though, are the invisible scars, how it can cause trauma for people so that they struggle to enjoy intimacy in a relationship. It's hard to let somebody get that close to you. Also, even head injuries are actually a really serious piece, too. When a person isn't quite the same, can't remember things quite the way that they used to. So personality changes can also occur. And so these are some of the physical consequences, and it's why we need to take this seriously when we hear about it. I believe, especially in a church context, this needs to be a place that is actually safe for people when we come and share these things with you. We should be people who can be safe for others. All right. So the shame and fear, the psychological trauma, these are all things that can actually impact the person. Emotional behavioral problems can also show up from this. There could be strained family relationships because oftentimes the person is put in a space where they have to choose between family or me. And this is another way to leverage the relationship. It's like, you love me more than your mom, you love me more than your brother. And it's the demand that you cut people off. So strained family relationships can be the result. Because after all, when the person gets out, the people remember how they were treated and how they were put second. And so, all right, so let's jump over to, even though there's a little more information here, I do want to jump more over to solutions. So we're going to move through a few slides here and try to understand like how you really get out of this and how it is that people even find themselves trapped in it in the first place. So some of those 5 signs of being in that cycle of abuse is the relationship becomes very enmeshed. Like it's just me and that person and no one else. Like it has to be us all the time. There's never any space for individuality in the relationship. The second one is kind of the codependent, where I cover for the person all the time. The third one, as I mentioned before, is isolation from family and friends. The fourth one is the gaslighting, what we were talking about before, like I get you to take responsibility for things that aren't your fault. And then the fifth is like is not being able to recognize your own individuality in that relationship. Has anybody ever heard of Stockholm syndrome?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Stockholm syndrome actually comes from the bank robbery that happened in Stockholm, where these folks were taken hostage, and they were in that hostage situation, and they did whatever the robbers were asking them to do. But once they escaped, they still were trying to defend the robbers after they were already let out of their custody, and they were just like, "Why are you still defending these people?" And what happens is sometimes we can get so locked in our survival mode, like this is what it means to survive. I keep this person happy, they keep me alive, that even when they try to exit, they're still stuck in the same mindset. And so in order to break free from that, something needs to happen. So here's how we begin to provide some support. The first thing is if you're somebody on the outside, you want to be able to listen without judgment. The person does not need to be reminded of how stupid it is to be in this relationship and all these pieces. That actually does not help people very much. They really just need you to be able to listen and support, which is extremely hard to do when they keep going back into a dangerous situation. But that listening and support is how you keep yourself as a helpful ally in these situations. The second one is providing information. Probably one of the biggest ones that I can tell you right now is actually a website called thehotline.org. If somebody types that into the URL address, it will take them straight to a page, and it will also immediately notify you that your activity on the internet can be tracked. And if you just hit the escape button, it immediately closes the window down because the people who created that page actually understand how domestic violence works and how difficult it is to actually be able to get away without being tracked. But there are supports out there, and you want to make sure that you help somebody get in contact with supports. Cannot say that enough. Help people to know that they're not alone in their experience. The second one is being able to encourage them to seek help. So I used an example before, and it's a question that I would want to arm you with too. Is this a relationship that you would want for someone you love? Would you be okay with a friend of yours being in a relationship like this? How would you counsel somebody if they were dealing with the same situation that you are? Would you actually allow someone that you love and care about to be treated this way? The fourth one here is respecting the person's autonomy. It's very, very tempting to kind of drag somebody out by the shoulders and take them out of the relationship. But here's the problem with that. If you become another person in their life who takes complete control of their decisions, guess what you're keeping alive? You're keeping alive the same pattern. It keeps the same pattern alive. So autonomy is necessary. Now, this doesn't mean don't call the police. Like if you see something, you want to make sure you do that. But there's actually even a step on this one too, and I put it on the slide. Okay. So one of the things I want to tell you is do not confront the perpetrator. If you ever see a situation like this, do not confront the perpetrator because it puts you in harm's way and it actually puts the other person in harm's way as well. If somebody is planning to leave, the most dangerous time in a domestic violence relationship is when you're trying to leave. That is the most dangerous time far and away. It's almost always when things become violent to the point of death. Is when someone is trying to leave. So do not confront the perpetrator. Do not talk to the perpetrator about any of this stuff, and make sure that the person that you're speaking to actually has privacy if you're even suggesting that they leave. This also means being mindful if you're on the phone with them, because oftentimes when somebody's in a situation like this, they make them put all their calls on speaker because they want to track everything that's going on in the life of this person. So if you are going to intervene and help someone, make sure that you are protecting them, but make sure you're also protecting yourself. All right, does this make sense so far? Again, I know this is not light information, but it is something that can and has saved people's lives. I worked with somebody who experienced many of the things that I'm talking about here. And the reason that they finally got out was because of actually a session that we had. Now, I did not know that the violence was still going on because we're not going to talk about it. But the violence was continuing to go on. And there was a specific session where I was sitting there with both of them because I was doing couples therapy, which I would never do if I know that there's violence like that going on active. And I confronted them about something because they were trying to say that they had no control over their behavior. By the way, that is a lie. Violence is a choice. People will say, oh, I blacked out. It's like, oh, that's interesting. When you blacked out, did you destroy your own property? That's weird. How come you didn't black out when other people were around? That's really convenient. So you only black out when we're alone. And when you blacked out, you seem to not like hurt your favorite pet. It's weird how that works out. It's because it's a lie. Do not buy into this. People are personally responsible for their own actions. Violence is a choice. Now that's different than if somebody's like thrashing around and it doesn't have any control over their own bodies and they're not like targeting people. We're talking about violence that's directed towards another human being. That is a choice. It's not how that works. So supporting their autonomy, respect is really key. Some of you have ever seen the Chinese character for the word listen, but the Chinese character for the word listen has a lot of really useful tips in it. I just want you to catch this. If you want to draw it out, you can. It's kind of hard to do. But the Chinese character for the word listen actually explains all the things that are necessary for listening. So like the characters in Chinese oftentimes have pictures that are put into them. So the first part up there, as you can see, is the ears. So you listen with the ears. This means you actually listen to the content of what people are saying. But if you look on the right side, it actually says you listen with what else? Your eyes. Because people don't just talk with their words. they talk with their eyes. So I was sitting with a woman who unfortunately was in a situation like this, and they were wearing a hat. I later on found out the reason they were wearing a hat is because they actually got stabbed on the top of their scalp and just were wearing a hat to cover it up. Cannot make this stuff up. I don't know how she survived. Hope she got out of there. That was exactly what I was encouraging her to do. But I had to listen with my eyes because her words were saying everything's fine. Her eyes were saying, oh yeah, everything's fine. Listen with your eyes. Listen with your eyes as well. The next thing on here is you listen with your heart. This is where we talk about your intuitions. Something just doesn't quite feel right. Something seems off. You want to make sure that you're listening to those intuitions as well. Then that fourth character down there, it actually means king. And what would that have to do with listening? Well, the reason why the king part comes in there is because you want to listen with respect. You treat people like royalty. It's kind of the idea that's implied in there. And so when we listen to people, it's not just a matter of listening to the content, but it's listening with all of these components. And then that middle line there is with undivided attention. You don't want to be multitasking when you're trying to support somebody through a difficult time. All right. So as I mentioned before, you don't want to find yourself trying to confront the partner or any of these things. Now we're going to kind of jump towards the end of this because I know we started a little bit late, so we have to end a little bit early. So some other tips for getting out of this. One of them is detachment. One of the best ways to help somebody get out of a domestic violence relationship is just give them 2 or 3 days apart from that person. I remember I was working with a particular program, and people will stay in this program for a number of days. And when they first got there, like, oh, I love this person. I want to be in this relationship. This is super important to me. But as time went on, where they had separation from them and weren't able to talk to them, they were like, wait a minute, I actually don't like my life with that person. But they can't see it because they're constantly in this dialogue with them. Which incidentally, this is another thing that will happen in these relationships. These guys will like lecture their significant others for like hours, just keep talking to them, talking to them, and talking to them because it wears them down and starts to flip the lid. So getting some distance, actually detaching from that person, not taking responsibility for their behaviors. The other one is recognizing when you are not being treated as a person, but as an object, like you are not somebody's property. So that's the other one that you also want to be able to do. So the key here, again, is differentiation. You're not responsible for that person's behaviors. All right. So just jumping to our last couple of examples here. Probably one of the biggest things that you can do is actually spend time thinking about a healthy relationship. So one of the conversations I have with somebody who's in a bad relationship is I said, all right, tell me what you want your life to look like 10 years from now. Maybe you have like a kiddo who's like, do you want to have kids? And like, yeah, I want to have kids. Okay, so tell me what you picture. Like, well, I kind of picture the kids playing on the swings, kind of hearing them giggle in the background, sunny days, sitting on a park bench. And who do you picture that you're with? Oh, I picture I'm with somebody who treats me this way, they treats me with respect, somebody just loves me for me, appreciates what I do, really happy together, we don't argue and fight every day. And I ask, does that person look anything like the person you're with right now? The answer is always no. It's always no. But then there's usually a rejoinder, and that is, but he could be. But what I try to tell people is do not stay in a relationship with anybody for who they could be. It's like he could have a job. He could be nice. But is he nice? And does he actually have a stable job? If the answer to those things is no, then your answer should also be raise the bar and look at the examples of the positive relationships. So I already mentioned some of the legal aspects. Don't let it just turn off. Okay. Ready or not, I guess we will conclude there. But the last concluding point I guess I want to be able to make for you all is when you see things like this, make sure that you provide support. There are ways to escape out of these things, and there is getting yourself back. This is not the end of the story. But a lot of what it takes is beginning to think for yourself, if you're somebody who's in this relationship, and making sure that you have supports and that you're actually connected with the community. Love does not have to be like this. I know love can be hard and relationships can be hard, but this is not a necessary component. If the only way that you feel like you can stay in a relationship is to rescue somebody from themselves, then you need to find another relationship. All right. All right, so I will stop there, and I want to make sure that I leave a little bit of space for questions. So does anyone have any immediate questions that I can answer, or anybody have like any of the question cards that have been filled out that we can collect to make sure that I can answer any questions on relationships? Yes.
It's a two-tier question.
Mhm.
Are feelings considered traumatized?
Okay, so like, are hurt feelings considered a traumatized brain? Somebody gets their feelings hurt. So you mean like, if I have hurt feelings, does that mean I'm traumatized?
Well, I'll put it in the context of work in the church.
Mhm.
In the church, people get hurt feelings.
Yes.
And a lot of times people leave church because of hurt feelings. Is that hurt feelings considered traumatized?
Not necessarily. So sometimes trauma can make people more sensitive to hurt.
The next question that goes with that is perception. A lot of times, what limited counseling I've done, I've noticed that communication is a difference in perception. I say, take my wife and I, for example. My wife, I took out the trash. I go, "Wait, you call me lazy that I can't take out the trash?" So I perceived her putting me down because she put the trash out, but she was just informing me.
Right.
How do you get past misconceived or misperceived intentions or comments from other people?
Right.
Because that's a lot of times what causes problems in the church.
100%. So yeah, the question is, how do you differentiate between miscommunication that goes on in a normal relationship or a church context, between something that can be like on that level of violence and that's causing trauma? And the big difference is power. So when you say that, you might feel a little bit defensive because you're like, hey, I don't want you to think ill of me. But in a domestic violence situation, it's because I'm trying to maintain power. You can feel the shift between those two things. So miscommunication is totally normal. That's why I want to say that from the beginning. Miscommunication and misperception is totally normal. The biggest pieces are, can we take personal accountability? Can we take responsibility? Can we get to a place where I'm not trying to control your behaviors, you're not trying to control mine? Because that's what really makes something more on the side of trauma.
And one last one, I'm sorry, and that is withholding. Your spouse withholds intimacy or withholds the checkbook or withholds something. Is that considered abuse?
Yeah. So it depends on why. If I'm withholding to get back at you, if I'm withholding to manipulate your behaviors, then that tends more towards abuse. But like, if like on the intimate side, I'm withholding because I don't feel comfortable in my own body and I don't feel like I can connect with you. That's not abuse. And this happens sometimes in relationships, especially people who experience any kind of sexual assault trauma. They're not withholding to punish. They're withholding because their bodies won't let them. So it comes back down to motivation. Motivation is critical in being able to differentiate between the two. Withholding the checkbook, I mean, I probably wouldn't do that because I don't know how you could not be trying to control something with that. So that was, I would have a more frank discussion about whether or not we just need to have separate bank accounts or something like that. But yeah, that one gets a little bit tricky. I suppose if the person was like addicted to alcohol, then I probably would take the checkbook. That's not control. That's just protecting our household from somebody's irresponsible behaviors. So context matters quite a bit, but for the most part, that's what's going to make the difference. All right. Other questions? All right.
I've been in situations like this. I've been in a situation exactly. I've been in a situation exactly what you said, and then my brain just told me, okay, I'm not going to inform that person what I did because they're obviously sensitive. Because I've always learned that people that ask those kind of questions, like that smart aleck remark, they're looking for trouble, and I'm like, I save my energy for God for something else. I don't need it for me. I just do it. Like I'm paid, it's not my job. I do stuff in hardware store. I do it. I don't tell people that I did it because then they always get that opinion. Is that wrong?
No. Again, because the idea here is that what you're trying to do in this moment is probably trying to protect yourself from the fight.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a little bit different than like I'm trying to make sure I'm in control of what you do. So again, power and control is the major factor here. Now we can always talk about like what's a better way to negotiate that. How do you want to confront those problems differently? Because that tends to be more of an avoidance strategy, but it's not always bad. Avoidance isn't always a bad thing. It's just you don't want it to be the only go-to when you're in situations. But no, that's not on the continuum of like violence towards anyone. So does that answer? Okay. So we have one back here and then one up here as well. Joseph. So we'll start back here first.
All right. Well, I mean, what if you were in a relationship and she hides this behavior and things that she does for like a year, and then lays it on you? I mean, I don't want to waste any more time. How are we supposed to find somebody
Yeah, yeah. So, so first of all, if that's not working for you relationally, you're not obliged to stay, right? Like, so leaving a relationship is not an act of violence. I mean, it's but yeah, I mean, really being able to find out, can this person get to the place where they can be open, right? Like, so somebody's inability to be vulnerable thus suggests that there's a lack of trust. And relationships, they thrive on trust. If trust is not there, that has to be addressed. And if it's not coming anytime soon, then the relationship itself is just it's not going to work out. Your second question is how do you? I think you were asking like how do you find a relationship where that's not a factor?
Right.
Yeah. So some of it really has to do with learning what to look for. That'll probably take me more time than I can probably articulate in a couple minutes. But knowing what to look for, there are signals when somebody has a healthy attachment style. So I definitely recommend. In fact, if you want to check out our website, it's called theattachmentproject.com. And on there, it actually talks about the different attachment styles. And typically what you want to be looking for is somebody with a secure attachment style. People with secure attachment styles tend to have that good balance between knowing how to be autonomous and knowing how to be in a relationship, knowing where to protect themselves and when to confront a situation. And you want to look for those qualities.
Website?
Attachmentproject.com. And if you find somebody with a secure attachment, then you're very unlikely to have those kind of problems because not that people with secure attachments are perfect, but they don't resort to these kinds of behaviors in order to function in a relationship. These are adaptive responses. We learn to close down because it's not safe to open up, and that kind of behavioral pattern has implications for whether or not a relationship comes together. It's not violent though. I mean, if somebody's doing it, they're not necessarily being violent, but still may not be what you're looking for.
Going back to this
Right.
one, simplistically, because like you said, I rather control more what you're feeling, what you're thinking. So in other words, could you explain the fingers up?
Yes,
the
yeah,
thumb,
okay. So maybe I can illustrate this best I can. So if I cause your brain to go offline, what I want to do is I want to wrap my brain around your emotional brain because yours is not online. So I'm going to put mine in place of yours. And so this is why if I can get you emotionally riled up, like if I can scare you, intimidate you, threaten you, then you're going to stop thinking with like your higher order thinking, long-term thinking, and you're going to think more in emergency. How do I get out of this situation? Then what I'm going to do if I'm the manipulator is I'm going to provide escape routes for you. I'm going to say, well, all this would just be fine if you just listened to me. If you just gave me the checkbook, if you just would let me have the car and stop complaining, blah, blah, blah. So now what I'm doing is I'm doing your thinking for you. So I want to flip your lid so I can put my lid over your emotion.
You said this was limbic.
Yeah, the limbic system. So this is emotional brain.
The thumb is the limbic.
Yeah, so the thumb is going to be the limbic. This is, and another way to think about it is your emotion.
What's the palm?
The palm is like your brainstem, and this controls like your heartbeat, your body, basic bodily functions. That's this part here. When people get down here, this is usually when people dissociate, they faint, they collapse, or they just like lose all ability to control themselves. This is literally results in people losing control of the bowels and all kinds of stuff.
And the fingers are all like the senses that affect your feelings.
Oh, okay. So the fingers are going to be the what they call the cortex. It's the outer
Okay.
part of your brain, like the bark of your brain. The word cortex actually means tree bark. So I think that's a good way to think about it. And so this is the outer part of your brain where you do all your thinking, planning, reasoning. Yeah, your frontal lobe. This is it. Yeah. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay. All right. All right. Any other questions before we? Because we're going to take a brief break because we have another presentation coming up. We might start just a little bit later to make sure everybody has at least 15 minutes or so. But okay. All right. So let's pause here, and certainly if there's other questions that come up, feel free to throw them out there. But our next presentation will be shorter than this one, and so we should be through that presentation in about 30 minutes or so. And I'll make sure to leave the last 15 minutes for the questions. But please feel free to stretch out. It's kind of warm in here, so I know everybody's kind of like feeling the fatigue you just ate. So please go walk around, stretch your legs, and we will come back in about 15 minutes to start our last presentation for today.